Have you ever wondered why sometimes it just feels better to be angry? And sometimes why being in a state of depression or feeling bad for yourself just feels natural? On today's episode, I want to talk about the steps we can take to come out of those mindsets and to find the peace that we've been looking for. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Preconceived Podcast, the podcast that asks the question, what are you really thinking? On today's episode, I want to talk to you about something that I've been dealing with personally, and it's about our emotions. And we touched on this a little bit last week, but we're talking about the atmosphere and the environment that we create in our lives. The atmosphere that we create is such an important thing because everything that comes from our lives, everything that grows out of who we are, is based out of the atmosphere that we create, out of the environment that we cultivate. So this week I was going through some things and I was thinking about why sometimes it just feels better to be angry. Why sometimes it feels like being depressed or feeling bad for yourself is just natural. And I think that there's a very good reason for this. I believe that when we think about these things, we would be remiss if we didn't look at not just the physical aspect, but also the spiritual. On an everyday basis, me, you, everybody around us, we're dealing with things on a physical level, but there's also a spiritual environment that comes into play. And that spiritual environment is actually attracted to our thoughts and to our intentions. In Matthew chapter 12, we see Jesus talking about the spiritual realm. And what he basically says is that there are spirits in this world, in the spiritual realm, that are looking for places to find a home. Now, I don't want us to panic about this, but the truth of the matter is, more often than not, that home is us. And our thoughts and our emotions, the things that we exist in, the things that we allow to exist in our environments, are actually the things that are inviting those spirits to have influence in our lives. Now, when we entertain thoughts that are angry, when we entertain thoughts of perhaps it's unforgiveness or holding a grudge against somebody, a lot of times it does make us feel better. It feels right, it feels normal because we feel justified in the decisions that we're making and the emotions that we're feeling. But what I think that we fail to realize often, what we're actually doing is inviting other spiritual influences in our lives and giving them the ability to speak into those situations. So once again, in Deuteronomy chapter 30, it says that I give you the choice between life and death. We have a choice to say that I want to listen to life, that I want to have thoughts that are life-giving to my relationships, to my emotions, to my general state of mind, or we can choose death. We can choose to hold grudges. We can choose to stay in places of anger or depression or feeling bad for ourselves, all the while inviting other influences to come into our lives. Now, I don't know about you, but for me personally, I think I've done this far too much already in my life. And what I want to do is to look at every situation. I want to look at every relationship that I have and to know that when I'm choosing life, when I'm choosing to think positive things, when I'm choosing forgiveness, even though I might have every reason to hold a grudge, what I'm doing is I'm inviting the Spirit of life, the Spirit of God to have influence in my life, knowing that I can trust Him in all things. Knowing that in that relationship, even if I was completely in the right, I'm giving the control to Him to be able to speak into that situation. Trusting Him that knows the beginning from the end, that I don't have to have all the answers. The environments that we cultivate, the atmospheres that we create and allow to grow in our life have such a huge effect. So when we're talking about being preconceived, I want us to think about the fact that we're actually being proactive. We're being intentional in our thoughts, being intentional in our relationships. And when we're thinking that it's easier to stay angry, easier to stay depressed, that we're going to say, no, that's not who I am anymore. I'm choosing life instead of death. And I want to walk forward in what God has for me. So what I want to do is with this Preconceived podcast is to choose to be intentional. Not just in our actions, but in our thoughts that precede the actions. I want us to be intentional in our relationships, to be intentional in what we allow to be existing in our minds and what we're choosing to focus on, what we're choosing to meditate on. I want us to be intentional knowing that if we choose life instead of death, if we choose God's way instead of what just feels best, that we're walking down a path towards what He has for us, trusting in His good purpose for our lives. It really is a daily journey. It's something that we need to continue to do on an everyday basis. But I believe in 2019, if we would choose to make these decisions, that it's going to have such a dramatic effect on our lives. So next week, we're going to talk about a few more practical ways of being able to put these things into action. I want to talk about some of maybe the frustrations that we have as we try to put these things into action because it is a journey. It's a process. But I believe that we're going to do it and that you're going to do it and this is going to be the best year yet. So on next week's episode, what I want to talk about is some of the challenges that we face when we're choosing to renew our mind. when we're choosing to create atmospheres in our life that are going to produce life instead of death. Because this is a process. It's not an easy thing to do. So a lot of times it's easy to get discouraged, to feel bad instantly. But I want us to know that this is a process that we're going to go through together in 2019 and hopefully beyond. So remember, if you like the video, if you like what we're talking about, to hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, comment below if you want to tell me what you think. I would really appreciate it. Have a great week.